My name is Dominic Ashford. And if you had told me 3 years ago that the day I finally won full custody of my 2 children would be the same day I discovered they shared absolutely no blood with me, I would have laughed in your face. But life doesn't ask for your permission before it breaks you open. This is not a story about betrayal alone. This is not a simple revenge story. And it is definitely not the kind of reconciliation you are probably expecting. This is a story of how one man had to completely rebuild his understanding of what a father is, what love means, and what it truly costs to choose to stay when everything inside you is screaming to run. Stay with me, because nothing about this story goes the way you think it will. I met Vanessa Calloway in the autumn of 2013 at a fundraising dinner for a children's literacy program in Atlanta. I was 31 years old, running a mid-sized construction consulting firm I had built from absolutely nothing, and she was 28, a pediatric occupational therapist with a laugh that could silence an entire room just by filling it. We were introduced by a mutual friend, a woman named Greta, who later told me she had never seen Vanessa look at anyone the way she looked at me that night. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Within 6 months, Vanessa and I were inseparable. Within 18 months, we were engaged. We married in March of 2015 in a small ceremony in Savannah, surrounded by both families and a handful of close friends. My mother cried through the entire reception. My father pulled me aside after dinner and told me Vanessa was the finest woman he had ever seen me with, and that I had better not waste that. I told him I had no intention of ever wasting a single day of it. Our daughter, Lily, was born in January of 2016. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and I stood in that delivery room with tears pouring down my face, holding this tiny person who somehow already had her mother's eyes and what I was absolutely certain was my stubborn set of the jaw. The nurses had to remind me to breathe. Our son, Marcus, followed 22 months later, in November of 2017. He was calmer than his sister from the very first moment, looking up at me from the delivery room with these wide, searching eyes like he was already trying to figure me out. I told Vanessa that Marcus was going to be a philosopher. She laughed and told me he was going to be a handful. Those early years of parenthood were exhausting in the way that only parents truly understand. There were nights when I survived on 3 hours of sleep and cold coffee. There were weekends when the house felt like a controlled disaster zone of toys, spilled juice, and half-finished snacks. And there were moments, quiet moments, that I will carry with me until I die. Lily falling asleep on my chest while I read to her. Marcus grabbing my finger with both his tiny hands and refusing to let go. I was a father. I was completely, wholly, irreversibly a father. And I had never been more certain of anything in my entire life. The trouble with certainty, I would learn, is that it can blind you to the things you are not looking for. Looking back now with the particular cruelty of hindsight, I can see the signs. They weren't invisible. I was simply not trained to read them. By 2018, when Marcus was just under a year old and Lily was 2, Vanessa had returned to work part-time. She had also begun spending more time with a circle of friends I did not know particularly well. She mentioned one name more than the others. His name was Roland Mercer. Roland was a former college acquaintance of hers, recently relocated to Atlanta after a divorce of his own. He had, according to Vanessa, reinvented himself. He was now some kind of wellness entrepreneur, whatever that meant. He ran retreats. He spoke at conferences. He had written a self-published book that Vanessa mentioned twice before I finally asked to see it. I read 40 pages and put it down. I did not like Roland Mercer. I want to be honest about that. But I also want to be honest that my dislike of him was largely instinctual and largely unexplained. I had no evidence of anything improper. I had only a feeling, the kind of low-grade, persistent feeling that lives in your chest like a slow-burning coal. I said something to Vanessa once. Just once. In the spring of 2019, after she came home from a dinner she described as a group outing, but arrived home from in Roland's car rather than her own, she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not guilt. Not exactly. It was something closer to pity, which somehow felt worse. Dominic, she said very carefully, you can trust me. I chose to believe her. I chose it deliberately, The way you choose to step onto ice you are not entirely sure will hold you. Over the following months, I poured myself into work and into the children. Lily had begun talking in full sentences and was absolutely certain about everything she felt and wanted. Marcus was developing the slow, easy smile that stopped strangers on the street. I coached Lily's first soccer team at age 4. I built Marcus a wooden train set in the garage over 3 weekends. I was present, deeply, deliberately, completely present. But between Vanessa and me, something had shifted in the architecture of our marriage. It was not dramatic. There were no screaming fights, no thrown objects, no dramatic accusations. It was quieter and somehow more devastating than any of that. It was a slow replacement of genuine closeness with a kind of polite management. We were two competent, reasonable adults running a household together, and we had somehow stopped being each other's person. By late 2019, I knew the marriage was in serious trouble. And somewhere beneath that knowledge, buried under layers of denial and hope and sheer exhaustion, was a darker fear I was not yet ready to name. The marriage ended, officially, in the winter of 2020. I found evidence I did not go looking for. I want to be clear about that. I was not snooping, was not digging through her things, was not operating from some paranoid surveillance mindset. I was looking for a phone charger. I opened a drawer in the bedroom I rarely used, and I found a printed photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph was of Vanessa and Roland Mercer. It was not an innocent photograph. The note was in his handwriting. I read it twice, then folded it, placed it back where I found it, and sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like a very long time. I called my older brother, Calvin, that night after the children were asleep. Calvin is 6 years older than me, a quiet man who was once a Marine, and is now a high school history teacher, which tells you everything you need to know about the kind of person he is. He drove over without asking a single question. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened. When I finished, he said, very simply, "What do you want to do?" I said I did not know yet. When I confronted Vanessa the following evening, she did not deny it. She had been seeing Roland Mercer for 14 months. She told me she was sorry. She told me she had not intended for it to happen. She told me several things that I think she genuinely meant and that made absolutely no difference to the damage they described. I asked her one question that night, and only one. I asked her if the children were mine. She looked at me, and for a moment she looked genuinely startled, almost offended. Then the expression changed. Something went very still behind her eyes. She said yes. She said it clearly and without hesitation. I believed her. The divorce proceedings began in January of 2021 and consumed nearly every resource I had, financial, emotional, spiritual. Vanessa retained an attorney named Gerald Park, who was widely considered one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the city. I retained a woman named Petra Hollis, who was widely considered the most methodical. The custody battle was the worst of it. There is no honest way to describe a custody dispute between two parents who both love their children without using words like brutal and devastating and grinding. We both loved Lily and Marcus. I have never doubted that. But loving children does not automatically make two adults capable of agreeing on how to raise them after the implosion of everything that held them together. The proceedings stretched across 18 months. There were depositions. There were home evaluations. There were sessions with a court-appointed child psychologist. There were moments when I sat in Petra's office and wondered whether any of this was survivable. Throughout it all, I showed up for every evaluation, for every appointment, for every school pickup and bedtime and Saturday morning. I built a case not through strategy alone, but through the simple, repeated, documented act of being there. In June of 2022, a family court judge in Fulton County awarded me primary physical custody of both Lily, then 6, and Marcus, then 4. Vanessa was granted generous visitation for days per week, alternating holidays, and extended time in the summers. It was not a perfect outcome for either of us. But the judge had determined that primary stability for the children was best served by remaining in a home they had always known, with a parent who had demonstrated the most consistent daily presence during the proceedings. I left the courthouse that afternoon with Petra and Calvin, and I stood on the courthouse steps in the June heat and felt something I could not immediately identify. It was not triumph. It was something quieter and heavier. Relief, maybe? Exhaustion. A kind of battered gratitude. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It was an email from a genetic testing service. I had submitted a DNA sample 3 weeks earlier through a private service on the advice of a close friend who had been persistently urging me to get clarity on something I had been trying not to look at directly. Lily and Marcus had submitted samples through what I had told them was a fun family ancestry project. They had been delighted to spit into little tubes. I stared at the notification for a moment, standing on those courthouse steps with the Atlanta summer pressing down on all of us. Calvin said something to me. Petra said something. I did not hear either of them. I opened the email. I stood there, and I read it 3 times. The results were unambiguous. Neither Lily nor Marcus share my DNA. Neither child was biologically mine. Petra touched my arm. She said my name. I think I said something back. I don't honestly remember. I remember the sound of the traffic. I remember the weight of the phone in my hand. I remember thinking, in the strange clarity that only total shock can produce, that the timing was so precise it felt almost designed. As if the universe had decided I needed to receive both the best and the worst news of my life in the same hour, so that I could never separate them again. I did not call Vanessa that day. I sat in Calvin's truck in the courthouse parking garage for nearly 2 hours, and then I asked him to drive me to pick up the children from school as if nothing had happened. Because here's the thing that nobody tells you about devastating news. When it arrives, your first instinct, at least if you are the person I have always tried to be, is not to burn anything down. Your first instinct is to protect the people standing nearest to the fire. Lily ran across the school pickup lane and threw herself at me with her usual absolute conviction that I would catch her. I caught her. Marcus came out behind her, slower, deliberate, already carrying his backpack like a little man of business. And when he saw me, he broke into that slow, spreading smile that I've been watching develop for 4.5 years. I held both of them tighter than usual that evening. Lily told me I was being weird. Marcus asked if we could have waffles for dinner. I told them both yes. That night, after they were asleep, I sat in the kitchen with Calvin and I cried. I want to say that without any softening. I wept with the kind of total physical involvement that I had not experienced since childhood. Calvin sat with me and did not say a single word for a long time, which is the only correct response to that kind of grief, and is something I will be grateful to him for as long as I live. When I could speak again, I said, "They're still my children." Calvin said, "Yes, they are." I said, "I don't know what to do about the rest of it." He said, "You don't have to know tonight." I confronted Vanessa 3 days later, in a private meeting arranged through our attorneys. I told Petra what I had discovered. Petra told me I had several legal options, including motions to reopen the custody proceedings under material misrepresentation. I told her to hold everything until after the meeting. I want to describe that meeting carefully, because it matters. Vanessa arrived looking like she was prepared for combat. She had Gerald Park with her. When I produced the DNA results and placed them on the table, Gerald Park reached for them before Vanessa did. The silence in that room lasted a very long time. And then Vanessa did something I had not expected. She asked Gerald to step outside. He resisted. She looked at him with an expression that left no room for negotiation, and he stepped outside. We were left with Petra as the only other person in the room, and Petra, who understood what I needed in that moment, moved her chair slightly back and became very quiet. Vanessa looked at the results for a long time. Then she looked at me. She said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I need to understand." And then, slowly in pieces, she told me the truth she had been carrying for years, the truth that had been buried beneath a marriage and 2 children and 18 months of legal proceedings, the truth that caused her to look at me in that delivery room with an expression I had sometimes thought about and never been able to name. She told me that both Lily and Marcus had been conceived during the period she had been seeing Roland Mercer. She had not known at first, with certainty, or rather, she had told herself she did not know, which is a different kind of dishonesty and perhaps a harder one to forgive. After Lily was born, she had done her own private test, and she had known. She had chosen not to tell me. She had made the decision. She said, because she genuinely believed, that Dominic Ashford was a father those children deserved, that Roland Mercer was not equipped to be a parent, that the life she and I had built was the life those children needed. She had been right about all of that, and wrong in every possible way at the same time. I sat across from her, and I listened to all of it, and when she finished, I said two things. The first thing I said was, I am not going to abandon those children. The second thing I said was, but I need you to understand that what you did to me cannot be fixed with an apology. Not today. Maybe not ever. She was crying by then. I was not. I had already done my crying. The months that followed were the most complicated period of my life, and I say that having already lived through a divorce and a custody battle, which is saying something. I made the decision, deliberately and with full information, to remain the children's legal and primary father. I did not refile for custody modification. I did not pursue any legal action against Vanessa related to paternity issue, though Petra told me I had legitimate grounds. I made this decision because when I looked at Lily and Marcus, the calculus was simple. They were 6 and 4 years old. They had done nothing except be born into a situation they had not chosen, and they were mine, not in the biological sense I had once assumed, but in every sense that had ever actually mattered. Lily at 6 had already developed a particular stubbornness and absolute certainty that I had always privately believed she inherited from me. She got it from somewhere else. That was all right. It was still hers, and it was still magnificent. Marcus still had that slow, spreading smile. It was still the best thing I had ever seen. I told no one except Calvin and my attorney for several months. Not my parents. Not my friends. I needed time to make peace with the information before I could begin managing anyone else's reaction to it. Roland Mercer, for his part, was apparently informed by Vanessa and disappeared from the situation with remarkable speed. He made no attempt to contact me. He made no attempt to claim any involvement with the children. I do not know where Roland Mercer is today, and I find that I genuinely do not care. What I did focus on during those months was something more important and more difficult. I focused on the children, and slowly, carefully, I began to rebuild a working relationship with Vanessa. I want to be very clear about what I mean by that. This was not a romantic reconciliation. There was no moment of forgiveness that washed everything clean. There was no dramatic reunion scene. What there was, instead, was two adults who shared the responsibility of raising two children, deciding that their shared love for those children was more important than their shared history of pain. It was not easy. It was, in fact, some of the hardest work I have ever done in my life. There were co-parenting meetings where Vanessa and I sat across from a mediator and spoke in careful, measured tones that cost both of us enormous amounts of energy. There were handoffs at the front door that were civil but cold. There were phone calls about school events and pediatric appointments that required me to set aside what I knew and focus entirely on what those two children needed in that specific moment. Vanessa, for her part, showed up for all of it. She was not absent. She was not in denial. She attended every school conference. She responded to every message within a reasonable time frame. She was, I will give her this, trying not to win me back, not to repair the marriage, simply trying to be the mother those children deserved, which I think was a real act of penance, quiet and unannounced and ongoing. In December 2022, 6 months after the custody decision and the DNA results, I sat down with my parents and told them the truth. All of it. My mother's face went through at least 5 distinct emotional states in the space of about 90 seconds. My father sat very still and was quiet for a long time and then said, "So Lily and Marcus are still your children?" I said yes. He said, "Then that's the only thing that matters to me." My mother reached across the table and held my hand for a very long time without saying anything, which was, if you know my mother, the most powerful possible response. Time moves differently when children are involved. It compresses. Lily turned 7. Marcus turned 5. The handoffs at the front door got slightly less cold, then slightly warm. Then, on a Saturday morning in the early spring of 2023, Vanessa and I stood in the driveway watching Marcus try to learn to ride a bike for what felt like the 40th time. And she said something that made me laugh. A genuine laugh, unprepared and unguarded. We both stood there for a moment, a little surprised by it. I am not going to romanticize what followed, because I think the real story is more interesting than any romantic version. What followed was not a reconciliation of the marriage. It was something slower and stranger and more durable. It was two people who had hurt each other deeply, who shared the most important loves of their lives, gradually and deliberately choosing to be in each other's orbit with honesty as a primary operating principle. Vanessa, at my eventual request, went therapy, not as a condition of anything, not as a legal requirement, but because she asked me once what she could do, and I told her the only honest answer I had. I told her she could do the work of understanding why she had made the choices she had made, so that the people who loved her, including those two children, would not have to pay for those choices again. She went consistently. For a long time. I went too, for my own reasons. Because carrying what I was carrying, the grief, the complexity of love without anger, the daily act of choosing those children even with the full knowledge of what I now knew, required more interior resources than I had on my own. My therapist was a man named Dr. Alvin Reese, a quiet, sharp man in his 60s who had the useful habit of asking exactly the right question at exactly the wrong moment. In one of our early sessions, he asked me whether I was staying for the children out of love or out of stubbornness. I thought about that for a long time. Then I told him I thought it was probably both, and that I wasn't sure there was a meaningful difference. He said that was one of the more honest things he had heard in a long time. What I know now, looking back from the distance of several years, is this: the love I had for Lily and Marcus before I knew the truth, and the love I had for them after knowing the truth, were not the same love. The love after was more conscious, more chosen, more rooted, in some way that I still find difficult to fully articulate, in who I had decided to be rather than in any biological imperative. It was not a lesser love. If anything, and I recognize how strange this sounds, it was a larger one. Fatherhood is not located in DNA. I know this with the certainty of someone who has been tested on the question in the most direct possible way. Fatherhood is located in the 2 o'clock in the morning. It is located in the school pickup line. It is located in the Saturday afternoons at the soccer field, and the Tuesday evening homework battles, and the Saturday morning pancakes, and the quiet presence at the end of the day when the world has been a lot and someone small needs to be held. Lily knows now. We told her when she was 9 in 2025, with the guidance of her therapist and Vanessa's, in a careful conversation that was one of the hardest things I've ever done, and also, unexpectedly, one of the most clarifying. She cried. She asked several very direct, 9-year-old questions. She eventually said, with the particular firmness she has always had, "But you're my dad." I told her yes. I told her that was never going to change. She wiped her face and told me she wanted tacos for dinner. We have not yet had the conversation with Marcus. He is 7 as of this writing. We are waiting, with professional guidance, until the time is right for him. There is no perfect time. There is only the commitment to meet that conversation when it arrives with the same honesty we have tried to bring to all of it. Vanessa and I are not together. I want to be very clear about that, because I think there is sometimes an expectation in stories like this that all suffering resolves into reunion, and that redemption looks like two people choosing each other again in the romantic sense. That is not our story. What Vanessa and I have, instead, is something I think is rarer and, in its own way, more remarkable. We have a genuine working partnership in the raising of these children. We show up at the same school events and sit near each other. We coordinate holidays without a mediator. We occasionally have coffee, the three of us, when Lily or Marcus has something important going on that we both need to prepare for. We are not friends, exactly, but we are no longer enemies. We are, to borrow a word from our mediator, aligned. Vanessa has, as far as I know and care, continued her therapy and continued the work of being a good mother. She has not entered into another relationship as far as I am aware. I do not monitor this. It is simply not my concern. I am living in the house we shared, which I kept in the divorce. I have dated cautiously twice in the 3 years since everything happened. The second person I dated knew my full story and did not run. I am taking that as a good sign. My firm is doing well. Better than well. I think difficulty has the occasional gift of clarifying your purpose. And I emerged in the last 3 years with a clearer understanding of what I was building and why. I have 17 employees now. We won a contract this past spring that my 30-year-old self would not have believed. Calvin remains the best person I know. He and I have dinner most weeks. He asks about the kids and listens to the answers with genuine interest, which is all I ever really need from the people in my life. My parents are extraordinarily devoted grandparents. They do not know the biological details yet, and that is a conversation I am still finding the right time and the right words for. But what they know is this. Lily and Marcus are their grandchildren, completely and without qualification, and that knowledge requires no further clarification on any given Sunday afternoon. If you are watching this and you are somewhere in the middle of your own version of this story, I want to say something directly to you. There is no clean version of this. There is no path through something like this that does not require you to hold several contradictory things at the same time. Love and grief, anger and forgiveness, the truth of what happened, and the reality of what continues to be worth protecting. I am not offering this story as a template. My choices were mine, shaped by my specific situation, and my specific children, and my specific understanding of who I want to be. Other people in my circumstances have made different choices, and have been entirely right to do so. What I am offering is simply this. The record of one man who found out, on the best and worst day of his life, that the thing he had built his entire identity around was not what he thought it was, and who discovered in the long, difficult, irreplaceable work of figuring out what to do next, that identity is not a fixed location. It is a direction, and you can always choose to keep walking in it. Lily is 9 years old. She recently lost her second tooth, decided she was going to be a marine biologist, and spent 40 minutes explaining to me the difference between dolphins and porpoises. She is the most direct person I have ever met, and I love her completely. Marcus is 7 years old. He has recently developed a passionate, mysterious interest in chess, which he is already better at than me and does not try particularly hard to hide. He still has that slow, spreading smile. It still stops strangers on the street. They are mine. They have always been mine. And that is the only thing that has ever actually mattered. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like, subscribe, drop your story in the comments below.